Welcome to Life Empowered. Today I have my twin. Well, not exactly, but she has the same name as me. So today you get Krista and Krista, and this is a precursor. You're probably going to see her a few more times, but talking about different things. But today we're just going to introduce to you Krista Ritt, and we're going to talk to her about a journey in her life and what she did, what happened that she was able to overcome that and move forward, and then a little bit about who she is today and why the heck you're going to see her more than once. But anyhow, thank you so much, Krista, for coming and joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Krista, you were telling me that you grew up in the church.
Yes.
So you knew who God was, you knew who Jesus was, and you said you had, prayed that sinner's prayer, as we call it, and asked Jesus into your heart, right?
Yes, at about 5 years old.
Okay. And so at 5, we're quite young, and some remember more than others because I don't remember squat at 5, but obviously you do. So tell us a little bit about what you thought or what you can remember about that time and asking Jesus in your heart.
Yeah, so I was actually in the car driving with my dad, and he was telling me actually a little bit about the end times, and I had known about the gospel of Jesus because he took me to a lot of church. He would take me on date nights to church all the time. We went to church on Sunday, Sunday school, all of that. But just in talking about the end times, he was talking about salvation and all of that. And I was like, well, I want to be saved. And so he pulled the car over and we said the sinner's prayer right there. And that was when I was about 5 years old.
That's kind of cool and kind of scary. Wondering what he was talking about those end times, the end of the world, if you didn't know. So a 5-year-old, depending on how detailed you get, that could get a little scary.
Yeah.
So after that, what did that mean for you as growing up as a kid? What did that look like in choosing to live or walk with Jesus?
I was raised in a household where there was a lot of perfectionism. And not that it's a bad thing to strive for excellence, because I think it's good to strive for excellence. But I went to a private school. I went to a private Christian school, and there was always this thing in the back of my mind of, you have to be good enough. You have to try to be good enough. And
so you mean like rules you had to follow?
Lots of rules.
And what would happen if you don't follow these rules?
Lots of legalistic rules that you had to measure up to. And of course, it was the 80s. So I think a lot of you can relate to those 80s and legalism of the 80s. But yeah, if you didn't measure up to them, you always have that punishment in the back of your mind.
So does that mean you wouldn't go to heaven, or you just were a bad Christian?
Bad Christian.
And so you don't want to be a bad Christian.
Don't want to be a bad
That doesn't
Christian.
sound good.
I want to be a good Christian.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're striving to live up to these standards so that you can feel good about how you live.
Yes, there's this set expectation in the Christian community that I grew up in of what you needed to be like and what you needed to attain, and, the do's and the do nots, and how you needed to live by them. Although grace was discussed, it was not much experienced. Does that make sense?
And so it was still foreign to you, especially as a kid.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you talk about this pressure that you're feeling growing up. So did you continue to do pretty good at being a good Christian? Did you do something to be that bad Christian, or what came about that things started to change for you?
For me, I was generally a good Christian. If you're looking at me from the outside, we all have. No one is good, no one except the Lord. But I did the one big fail that was a public fail was when I was dating my husband. I started dating him at age 16, and we fell into temptation, and I became pregnant out of wedlock when I was 19.
I think that's a bad Christian.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we were quote leaders in the youth group and things like that. So when that happened, we were engaged at the time, and we had to bump up our wedding, and it was very humiliating. And we were told certain things by certain people, and it was a very humbling experience. But
when you say certain things, you mean hurtful things or truthful, freeing things? What are you referring to?
Some hurtful things.
Both.
But we were loved on by some, a lot of people, but we were told some things that, we deserved, obviously, but I think people were shocked. Like, I was told on my wedding day, no, you're really not supposed to wear white.
Oh, so trying to put shame on you. So regardless of what you felt because of the choices that you made, or what you had to process because of consequences, right? We all have consequences of choices. Someone felt the need to make sure you understood that you should feel shame.
Yes.
And I don't think that's really anyone's place, because as you briefly mentioned, we all got our stuff, and we all get dirt on our face and make mistakes because we aren't perfect. And that's why we need God. He doesn't expect us to be perfect, which I'm sure you're going to talk about a little bit, but he wants that. He loves us again for who we are. And yet, even when we know that, again, trying to be the good Christian, you wanted to please God and not feel bad and do the right things, but in our own flesh, we often fall short.
Yes.
And again, especially when you're a kid, right? Because you guys were kids.
We were adults. We were just young adults.
Yeah, depends how you look at that. But anyhow, okay. So the moral of the story, where are we going with this? What changed for you?
So as we talk, I just want to make a quick comment about this. So when you grow up in this expectation and this attitude of the church, it's easy to yourself start to judge other people as well. And I know I'm guilty of that too. And I have easily judged other people, like, oh, wow, they're doing that or whatever. When I got pregnant at 19, it changed everything for me. And it made me realize just how, easy it is to fail. And it just flipped the script for all of that. And so, we're all sinners. And the Bible says, judge not lest you be judged. And so it's just something we all have to be so careful of, to just choose to love and not to judge.
And it's easy to judge someone else for their weakness because it's not ours.
Right.
Oh, that's bad. Because it's easy to see in you or someone else, because that's not my problem. So it's very obvious that, wow, but it's hard to pay attention to our weakness. But we all have weaknesses, but we struggle in different ways. And and having empathy and grace for one another is important, because we all have them.
Yeah. And and I know that's hard to do, because even nowadays I have to remind myself of that, because I'm guilty of it too. So I have to pray,
Human
God,
nature.
give me grace.
Human nature.
Help me to love more. So
Yes.
Yeah.
So in this process with that, you realize, whew, here I definitely got the label for a time as a bad Christian, but you didn't say, okay, forget this, I'm done with God, because yes, I'm no longer good. So as you said, there was good and bad through that journey, and so where did it go from there?
So I got married. I was 5 months pregnant when I got married. Had my first child. She was a beautiful baby girl, Abigail Rose. And so I was young. I was 20 years old when I had her, 19 when I got married. And my husband, he was the first man that I ever seriously dated. We started dating when we were 16. and we were very much in love. But he always tells me I'm wild at heart. I'm never going to be tamed, he says. I'm a romantic, and
you keep things interesting.
I keep things interesting.
No wonder he likes you.
So, but for me, getting married so young was hard because I was wild at heart and I had romantic ideas, and I just I had to grow up really fast. I had to drop out of college and raise a child, and I had all these selfish desires, and I started to struggle with temptation a lot when it came to having a wayward heart and adulterous thoughts towards other men. And my husband, who knows about this now, he, is very loving and forgiving of all this, but it was a very hard time for me because although I would try to ask God for forgiveness and stop, and when I would be faced with these situations, I just could not overcome it on my own. And in the past, I would just obey, follow the rules, obey.
Mm-hmm.
And now I just was kind of sinking into this grip, and I couldn't overcome it. And one day I was in my bedroom, home alone, just sitting on my bed and reading God's word. And I was just so frustrated. And I started praying, and I said, God, why can't I overcome this temptation? And I just started reading in the word, Romans chapter 5, about, rarely will someone die for another person. And if that person does die for another person, that's usually a pretty good person. You wouldn't die for someone that's a terrible person. But if you're going to dare to die for someone, that's going to be a good person. But Christ showed his love for us by dying for us while we were yet sinners. And the revelation of God's love just came down on me like a flood in that moment, because I realized that even before I was born, he knew everything that I was going to do, everything I was going to think, and he went to the cross for me anyway. And I just started thinking out loud, how could you die for me? How could you die for me? And I just started weeping on my bed as I just, the yoke of rules and the yoke of legalism and the yoke of the do's and the do nots just broke off of me. And instead I was just embraced in his love and embraced in his grace.
The real freedom you were hungry for, and you thought it was with Jesus, but yet there were these chains that you couldn't see.
Yes.
But you felt it.
Yes.
It was that grace and that love. It's not rules and all the benefits that you'll get for the rules. It's the love and the grace that melt away.
Yes.
And brought that real freedom you were so hungry for.
Yes. And what was so cool is, God gives us desires and he gives us things in our hearts. And, Mike tells me I'm wild at heart. He tells me that even still, but there's a freedom. Whom the Son sets free is free indeed. And God has transferred that yearning to him in a sweet surrender. And he has poured out his blessings and a relationship with me instead. And he's satisfying that desire in me with himself. And so now I'm not hungry for it and searching for it in other areas. And so now I can walk in that freedom and dance in that liberty, as the song says.
And again, going to that, what you felt trapped in some ways because you were so young. And so you thought you were missing out on things. So in your mind, you're missing out on these freedoms that you could have if you hadn't been married, if you didn't have a kid yet, if you had just waited, you could have had these freedoms. Or if you would have acted out on these desires and looking elsewhere for these freedoms, this excitement. With those types of freedom of your choice comes consequence, we talked about, right? And there are consequences for all our actions, but consequence sounds bad, right? It's a an action causes another action. So you choose this, and it may feel good for the moment, but there would be other actions. If you would have acted, who knows what would have happened with you and Mike and your daughter and everything. Your whole future could have been different from one act of
Yes.
freedom. But
Yes.
with God's freedom, as you talked about, what's so cool about his freedom, it doesn't come with consequences, but it comes with real benefits of, because he loves us so much, he wants to bless us, and he wants to give us things that we have even yet desired or even know that we want. I mean, obviously some of us can really dream well. I'm not one of them, but other people do, and they have these big dreams and these excitements, and they look to God for them. But even with those people who can do that well, he still knows even more of what will bless you. And so in choosing freedom with him, though so many think it's about these do's and these don'ts and follow that, well, you can't do this and Christians can't do this. And anyhow, but that's not it. He's like, these are their guidelines of, here's the way that I say you should live, because then you will be blessed. But we'll be blessed with good actions if we trust him, because he knows what's best for us now and in the future. And so by having that freedom, experiencing that freedom, we don't have to suffer the consequences. But unfortunately, right, we still have our flesh to deal with. We still have issues. And even though you may have overcome that and things have changed, there's other stuff, right? There's other stuff that comes up in our heart. And but then again, that's why we talk about it. It's a relationship with Jesus. That's why it's not a rule following thing. It's supposed to be a relationship, because we're choosing his ways so that we can have benefits and not suffer consequences. But sometimes in little things, we don't always, or we don't even consult him, right? We don't ask him, well, what do you want me to do? Oh, no, I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do this. And we don't think it through. And then we do suffer consequences. But anyhow, his freedom, his real freedom, all these other things that are out there that tempt us or seem interesting, if they're not the way that God planned them, you're pretty confident, I'm pretty confident that if you think it through, there will be some consequences that you will not enjoy later because of that. Yeah. And that is what God wants from us. He doesn't want us to be trapped in this do's and don'ts or try to live right. And that is really what religion does, right? In general, that's what religion, because people, it's easy. If we can just say, we don't do this, 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 and this, check, 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 check. Okay, I'm good, right? That's what we as people think we need and think we want, so that we can just easily check off that we've done these things. Yes. It's easier, but yet harder to do it God's way, because it's really about choices every day and communicating with him and reading his word and spending time with him, having that relationship that gives us freedom. He still gives us freedom to choose. Do you want to choose to do whatever you want and see what the consequences are? Or do you want to see what God wants you to do and see what blessings he provides for you? And that's really a different way to live. Anyhow, that was my little tangent on that grace and that freedom. Did you have other things that you wanted to say about really realizing that freedom, that grace in walking with him outside of the rules and the do's and the don'ts?
I guess what I would add is that, Satan is always looking for a chink in your armor, and he knows where your weaknesses are. And there's going to be times in your Christian walk where you're strong, and there's going to be times in your Christian walk where you're weak. And he knows exactly where those weak moments are, and he's going to get under your skin and find those weak places. And that's when he's going to strike. And I would just say there was a time later on, much later on in my life, where I was experiencing a very weak moment. I was hurt by God. I was hurt by my church. I was hurt by friends. I felt very alone. And that temptation started creeping in again. And although I was mad at God, and although I was in a very dark place, I had to choose to remember who God was and to choose Jesus anyway. And when you're in those dark moments where whatever tempts you, when you're in a weak moment, I would really encourage you to remember who God is and remember what the times that he's been faithful in your life. Write them down, the times that he's been faithful, because he has been faithful. And then just put up your hands and just say, Lord, I surrender and I choose you anyway. And he'll give you beauty for ashes and he will be faithful to you, just like he's been for me.
And I like how you say choose again, because it's always a choice. It's always coming down to a choice. He will never make us do anything. That's what, everyone's like, oh, this, you got to follow. But no, he lays it out as a choice. And I wanted to add to, because I've been in those moments multiple times, unfortunately, because that's the way our life is, right? It's constant different seasons and journeys, but sometimes even when you don't feel it, like as she said, she wasn't feeling that she actually felt angry, but she chose to think back of, well, who's she going to trust, right? Is it going to be God or is it going to be me? Because that's really what it comes down to. Who am I trusting? And she didn't feel like trusting him. She didn't feel like she didn't want to. Her feelings were definitely leading her in the other way. But she had to weigh the heart and the logic, and again, looking to who he really has been, and then making that really good choice. Because she could have easily said, screw it. I'm just done right now. I'm just going to go deeper, because people do, right? And sometimes, and maybe you have even done that, but that it's still never too late, because again, he's always waiting. So even if you said you were at a point like that and you said, no, screw it, I'm still angry. I don't want you, God. And you did, because then there were consequences, because you will never be God and you will never provide those outcomes that you really long for. But if you stop for just a moment and say, God, I still don't understand. I'm still angry. I'm going to ignore these feelings and I'm going to choose you anyhow. Whew. Wait till you do that, and the power, the presence of God will meet you like that. He is there when you submit to him and say, all right, God, I really do need you. When you're at your lowest low or wherever that is, if you just pause and say, all right, he will meet you. It doesn't matter how many times you said no to him, how many times you turned away from him. His grace is there. I mean, that's crazy. You don't deserve that. I don't deserve that. But that is the freedom that he continues to offer to us if we just stop and we'll choose him. And thank you so much, Krista, for meeting with me today and just sharing a little bit of one of your journeys in life so far. But I think that can be so applicable to so many, especially, again, the church and religion and people, because that's where the problems are, right? We all got our stuff. And where's the problem in church? Where's the problem in religion? The people, making it messy, making it difficult. And again, some of you might be sick of me if you've listened to a few episodes. You can't live with them, you can't live without them. So take God with you and you'll get through it with those people, because we need each other. On our own, we are a disaster. With others, it's messy, but we still need each other, just finding those right people. So thank you, Krista, so much. It was a pleasure to share your journey, and hopefully we encouraged a few of you to look to God to help you and know what real freedom is today.